Now let the room darken around you. Let the weight of the day settle, and the gentle hum of the world outside become a distant, constant sound. There is no story to follow here, only a slow unfolding of a time when rest was not a given, but a brief pause in a long and unyielding rhythm. If the quiet depth of these hours brings you peace, you might consider letting the channel remain a part of your nights. Sleep, when it arrived in the medieval world, was a temporary surrender to exhaustion. It was not a soft descent into comfort, but a collapse into a stillness broken by the cold, the hard frame of a bed, and the deep, familiar ache of a body that had not known ease since waking. Nights were long, but they were not restful. They were a suspension of labor, a few hours where the demands of survival softened to a dull, persistent throb. The fire would burn low, its light fading to embers that glowed like distant, dying stars in the hearth. The air grew brittle, seeping through gaps in the walls, carrying the scent of damp earth and old straw. In the shared space of a single room, the sounds of sleep were not peaceful. They were the sounds of weariness, a cough that had lingered for months, the shift of a body on a coarse mattress, the soft, unconscious groan of a joint protesting even in stillness. Children murmured in their dreams, while adults lay in a state of half-awareness, listening for the foxes among the chickens, the change in the wind, the first hint of light that would call them back to work. The bed itself was a landscape of minor discomforts. A sack of straw, flattened by years of use, conformed not to the body but to its own hollows and ridges. It held the memory of every shape that had ever lain upon it, offering no support, only a slight elevation from the packed earth floor. In winter, the cold was an active presence. It began at the extremities, toes curling, fingers tucking under armpits, and moved inward, tightening muscles, drawing the shoulders up toward the ears in a slow, full-body clench. To fall asleep was to negotiate with this cold, to find a position where the chill was least acute, where the thin wool blanket could be shared and stretched. Warmth was not a state to be achieved, only a slightly less severe version of the cold. And through the night, the body did not relax so much as it grew heavy, its pains shifting from sharp awareness to a deep, resonant background note, like the drone of a distant bell. Waking came not from a sense of refreshment, but from a return of sensation. The cold had settled into the bones. The straw had shifted, leaving a new, uncompromising pressure against the hip or spine. The first light was a gray seep through oiled hide or wooden shutter, not an invitation, but a summons. There was no moment of stillness, no luxury of lingering. The body's complaints began immediately. A stiffness in the knees that crackled like twigs underfoot, a tightness across the back that made sitting up a slow, deliberate operation. The neck resisted turning. The shoulders carried the memory of yesterday's burdens, ready to be taken up again. This was not considered injury. It was the body's morning report, a catalog of functioning pains that confirmed you were alive and capable of another day. To rise without this chorus of aches would have been strange, a cause for suspicion, a sign of illness or a privilege so rare it bordered on the unnatural. The first movements were cautious, a series of small tests. Feet, calloused and often bruised, met a floor that was never truly warm. The sensation was of solid, unforgiving earth, sometimes packed smooth, sometimes uneven with wear. Standing was a transfer of weight, an assessment of which limb was most reliable, which joint would bear the load with the least protest. Clothing, laid over a stool or chest the night before, was damp with chill. Wool, rough and smelling of smoke and labor, was pulled on over skin that recoiled at its touch. Dressing was not a ritual of preparation for the world, but a practical layering of a second, slightly more mobile skin against the elements. Laces were fumbled with cold-thickened fingers. Boots, Stiff leather shaped by weeks of wear but never by the unique contour of a foot, were tugged on, often over bare skin or thin wraps of cloth. They offered protection from the ground, but no cushion from it. Every step was a firm meeting between soul and soil, a transmission of the world's hardness upward through the body. Morning light, when it fully arrived, did not flood in. It crept, pale and thin, revealing a world of muted colors and deep shadows. Inside the dwelling, smoke from the rekindled fire hung in a low layer, stinging the eyes, becoming a taste at the back of the throat. There was no breakfast as we understand it. Perhaps a piece of yesterday's hard bread, a swallow of small beer, a bit of pottage left from the evening meal eaten cold. Hunger was not a sharp pang, but a constant, hollow companion, a space within that was rarely filled, only quieted for a time. Eating was functional, a fueling of the machine, done standing or sitting on a rough bench, the mind already on the day's first task. The mouth, itself a source of its own private misery, would test the bread. A tooth, perhaps several, would send a warning jolt at the pressure, a reminder of a deep, slow decay that pulsed in time with the heartbeat. One learned to chew carefully, to favor one side, to accept that the act of eating was interwoven with threads of pain. This was not remarkable. It was simply how food was consumed. Water was drawn from a well or a nearby stream, its surface often skimmed with a layer of ice in winter. The bucket was heavy, its handle biting into the palm. Carrying it back was a balancing act, a strain on the shoulders and spine, the water sloshing cold against the leg with each step. This water was for drinking, for cooking, for rinsing. It was not for washing the body. The face might be splashed, the hands rubbed clean of the worst dirt, but the sensation of being clean, of fresh skin, was largely unknown. The body carried its own atmosphere, the smell of sweat and wood smoke, the faint metallic scent of old blood from small cuts, the earthy odor of wool and leather. It was the smell of work and of being alive, unremarkable and unnoticed. Then, the day's true work began, and the body's conversation with pain found its full vocabulary. For those in the fields, it was a dialogue with the earth. The soil was not soft. It was a dense, resistant thing, full of stones and old roots. To till it, to plant in it, to harvest from it required a constant bending. The back learned to curve, not in a single gesture, but in 1,000 small submissions throughout the day. Knees pressed into the cold ground, the damp seeping through layers of wool and leather, the joints grinding with a fine, gritty ache. The hands, already a map of old scars and fresh cracks, plunged into the dirt. Nails broke, skin split over knuckles. Thorns from weeds left fine, burning lines across the wrists and forearms. None of this stopped the work. The rhythm of the task, dig, plant, press, move, continued, a metronome set to the pace of survival. The sun, if it appeared, was not a benevolent warmth. It was a weight, a pressure on the back of the neck. It drew sweat, which stung in the eyes and traced salty paths through the grime on the face and chest. In summer, the air grew thick with the smell of turned earth and ripening grain, of one's own labor. Flies circled, landing on the neck, the hands, the corners of the mouth. The effort was continuous, a slow expenditure of strength that was not replenished by a midday meal, but merely slowed by it. A pause in the shade of a tree or a hedgerow, a drink of warm, flat beer from a skin, a lump of cheese or more bread. The body would seize up in these moments of stillness, the muscles stiffening, making the return to work a fresh ordeal of stretching and settling back into the groove of pain. For those whose work was indoors, in workshops or in the service of a household, the pains were different in location but identical in nature. Weavers, bent over looms for hours, felt a permanent crimp in the lower back, a tightness between the shoulder blades that no stretch could relieve. The eyes strained in the dim, flickering light of tallow candles or narrow windows. The repetitive motion of the shuttle, the lift of the heddle, the beat of the comb. These actions wore grooves not just in the wood of the loom, but in the tendons of the wrists and elbows. Blacksmiths stood in a circle of fierce heat, their faces and arms gleaming with sweat and soot, while their legs and feet remained in the comparative chill of the packed earth floor. The shock of hammer on hot iron traveled up the arm, a vibration that settled deep in the joints, leaving fingers numb and clumsy by day's end. Cooks endured the constant heat of the hearth, their arms crisscrossed with small, shiny burns from spitting fat and searing metal. The soles of their feet ached from hours on stone floors. The lower back ached from lifting heavy pots and leaning over grinding stones. And through all of this, there was the background noise of minor injury. A splinter driven deep under a thumbnail during woodworking. A shallow slice from a poorly held knife while butchering. A bruise blooming purple and green on a thigh from a glancing blow from a restless animal. These were not treated, only acknowledged. A splinter might be worried out with the point of another knife, or simply left to fester until the body pushed it out or absorbed it into a permanent lump of scar tissue. A cut was rinsed, perhaps, with the same water used for drinking, and bound with a strip of linen that was itself less than clean. It would redden, swell, pulse with a heat of its own, and then, if one was fortunate, slowly subside into a scab that would be torn open again by the next day's labor. Infection was not a medical emergency. It was a possible outcome, watched with a detached curiosity. If the limb remained usable, the wound was irrelevant. Only when it swelled to the point of immobility or began to smell of something beyond the usual odors of life did it become a problem. And even then, the solution was often crude, painful, and carried its own high risk. Time passed not in hours, but in the accumulation of fatigue and the slow arc of the sun. The light changed quality, from the thin gray of morning to the harsh white of midday, then to the long, golden shadows of late afternoon that stretched across the fields like tired fingers. The body's pains shifted with it. The sharp, specific aches of morning, the stiff back, the protesting knees, blended into a general, full-body weariness by midday. This was replaced by a deeper, more resonant exhaustion by evening, a fatigue that felt less in the muscles and more in the marrow of the bones. Hunger returned, not as a gnawing sensation, but as a lightheadedness, a slight tremble in the hands, a hollow feeling that made the walk back to the dwelling seem longer. The evening meal was a ritual of quiet endurance. It was prepared in the same smoke-filled room where the family lived and slept. The fire was built up again, its light now the primary source of illumination, casting large, dancing shadows on the walls. The food was simple, a pottage of grains and vegetables that had simmered for hours, its flavors muted and uniform. Meat was rare, a small piece of salted pork or fish added for flavor, not sustenance. The act of eating was slow, methodical. Jaws ached from chewing the coarse bread. Bad teeth made each bite a cautious exploration. The stomach, unaccustomed to large quantities, would feel tight and full quickly, but the fullness did not equate to satisfaction. It was a heavy, sluggish feeling, soon replaced again by the familiar hollow ache as the body began its long work of digestion on poor-quality fuel. After eating, there was no leisure. There were tools to mend, leather to oil, wool to card by firelight. Children might be instructed in simple tasks. Conversations were quiet, practical, about the weather, the state of the crops, the health of an animal. There was no energy for storytelling, for philosophy, for reflection on the nature of one's existence. Existence was its own answer. The fire began to die down once more, and with it, the world contracted to the small circle of its fading glow. The cold advanced from the walls, reclaiming the room inch by inch. The rituals of the night reversed those of the morning. Stiffly, Clothing was removed or loosened. The body, now cooled and stiff from sitting, would make its way to the bed. The process of lying down was another series of negotiations, finding the least uncomfortable arrangement on the unyielding straw. In the dark, the sounds of the night were amplified. The scuttling of mice in the thatch, the wind finding new holes to whistle through, the distant cry of a fox, the slow, even breathing of sleepers, interrupted by coughs or sighs. The mind did not race with thoughts of the future or regrets of the past. It was as tired as the body, capable only of observing the immediate sensations. The itch of wool against the neck, the dull throb of a bruised shin, the cold tip of the nose. Sleep, when it finally came, was not an escape. It was a temporary cessation, a short reprieve from the conscious management of discomfort. The body did not heal in this sleep. It merely paused. The pains did not leave. They receded into the background, waiting for the gray light to bring them forward once again. Familiar, constant, and utterly normal. Beyond the dwelling, the world continued its own silent, indifferent rhythms. In the forest, trees grew and fell, their leaves composting into a soft, dark earth that smelled of decay and renewal. Streams cut deeper paths through stone, their water cold and clear, untouched by human hands. Animals lived their brief, fierce lives of hunger and fear and reproduction. The moon traced its path across the sky, its light silvering the thatched roofs of villages, glinting off the metal bands of barrels, lying cold on the surfaces of still ponds. In the manor house, greater wealth did not mean less pain, only a different set of constraints. A lord might sleep on a feather mattress, but he would still rise with the grievances of age, the aches from hunting or riding, the toll of rich food and wine on a digestion never designed for abundance. His worries were of a different scale. Taxes, rivalries, the loyalty of his men, but they coiled in the stomach just as tightly, disrupting sleep with a different kind of tension. The stone walls of his chamber held the cold just as effectively as the wattle and daub of the peasant's hut, and the drafts that slipped through tapestries were, if anything, more sly and persistent. In the monastery, the pain was structured, given meaning by ritual and doctrine. Monks rose in the deep night for prayers, their bodies stiff from hard pallets, their voices hoarse with sleep and the chill of the chapel stone. Their days were a cycle of prayer, labor, and study, each action prescribed, each discomfort offered up as a mortification of the flesh, a step on a path towards spiritual purity. The hunger from fasting was not an accident of poverty, but a chosen emptiness. The cold endured during long hours of copying manuscripts in an unheated scriptorium was a test of devotion. Here, pain was not merely normal, it was useful. It wore down the self, carved away worldly attachment, left the soul, in theory, lighter and closer to God. The body's complaints became a kind of prayer in themselves, a constant, wordless dialogue with the divine about the burden of earthly existence. And for women, in all stations, the rhythms of pain were intertwined with the cycles of their own bodies and the relentless demands of care. The work of feeding, cleaning, tending to children and husbands, of processing food and cloth, was as ceaseless as fieldwork, and often performed while managing the private, grinding pain of childbirth's aftermath, or the monthly fatigue and cramping that was never mentioned, only endured. A woman might nurse a child with one arm while stirring a pot with the other, her back aching, her feet sore, a headache blooming behind her eyes from the smoke and noise. Her pains were not her own. They were part of the background noise of keeping others alive. To stop for them would be to let the fragile system of survival stutter. So she moved through them, her face a mask of calm concentration, her body an instrument played by the needs of the day. Seasons turned, and the character of the pain changed with them. Spring brought not relief, but a different set of demands. The body, stiffened and slowed by winter, was forced back into the sharper, more active pains of planting. Cold, damp mud clung to everything. Knees, already troubled, were plunged into this icy wetness for hours. The back, unused to the full range of bending, protested with fresh sharpness. But there was a quality of light, a softening in the air, that made the pain feel somehow more temporary, part of a cycle of renewal. Summer's pains were heated, soaked in sweat, a battle against insects and sun, and the pressing need to bring in the harvest before weather turned. The body moved as if through warm water, heavy and slow, the pains of burning fatigue in the muscles. Autumn was a time of aching satisfaction, of heavy lifting and repetitive motion. The threshing, the winnowing, the storing. The hands became raw, the shoulders a solid knot of tension. But there was a fullness to the landscape, a sense of provision, that lent a grim purpose to the hurt. Then winter returned, and the pain became crystalline, sharpened by the cold. It was no longer just in the muscles and joints. It was in the very air, in the act of breathing. Lungfuls of frozen air burned. Fingers turned white and clumsy, then burned with a fierce, prickling agony when brought near the fire. Old injuries, long forgotten in the warmth, announced themselves with deep, bony throbs. The world shrank to the distance between the hearth and the bed, and every movement within that small sphere was costly. The body conserved itself, moving with a stiff, economic precision, minimizing exposure. The mind grew quiet, turned inward. Days were short, nights interminable. Time seemed to slow, measured not by the sun but by the consumption of fuel and food, by the gradual sinking of the pile of logs, the emptying of the grain sack. Through it all, the sky watched, indifferent and vast. Clouds moved in silent processions. Stars wheeled in their ancient patterns. Rain fell, sometimes a soft drizzle that soaked through wool in hours, sometimes a violent downpour that turned paths to rivers of mud and made every task a misery. The wind was a constant voice, sometimes a whisper, sometimes a shriek, pressing against walls and faces, carrying the scent of distant places no one would ever see. People lived underneath this sky, their pains and small triumphs invisible from even a modest height. Their lives were brief flares of sensation: cold, hunger, warmth, fatigue, the fleeting comfort of a full belly by a fire, the deep, animal satisfaction of sleep when exhaustion finally overrode discomfort. There were moments, of course, that stood outside the economy of pain. The unexpected sweetness of a wild berry found in the hedgerow, the warmth of the sun on closed eyelids during a rare moment of rest, the sound of children laughing, a sound so pure it seemed to momentarily lift the weight of the world, the deep, resonant silence of a snowfall, muting all familiar sounds, the sense of communal purpose during a harvest or a building project, where individual ache was subsumed into a shared effort. These were not joys as we might define them. They were not sought or planned for. They were accidents of sensation, small islands in the constant river of endurance. They were noticed, perhaps, but not clung to. They passed, and the river flowed on. And so the days stacked, one upon the other, like bricks in a wall. The body aged not in years, but in accumulated injuries and adaptations. A limp became permanent. A shoulder settled into a slight, forward slump. The spine developed a curve that spoke of a lifetime of bending. The hands grew knotted, the fingers splayed slightly, shaped by the handles of tools. The face, weathered by sun and wind, became a map of squints and frowns, of lines etched by the constant low-grade strain of existence. By what we would call middle age, the transformation was complete. The person moved through the world with a careful, deliberate gait. Every step, every lift, every turn calculated to minimize the protest of sinew and bone. They had, in a very real sense, become their pain. It was not separate from them. It was the shape of their interface with the world, the physical record of their survival. The mind adapted too. It learned to filter out the constant signal of discomfort, to treat it as one treats the sound of one's own breathing, present, but unremarkable. Attention was reserved for acute threats, for the sudden, new pain that signaled breakage or disaster. The chronic ache of a bad back, the persistent murmur of a sore tooth, the familiar stiffness of cold joints. These became part of the self, as intrinsic as the color of one's eyes. Complaining about them was as pointless as complaining about the need to breathe. They simply were. Conversation did not revolve around how one felt, because the answer was universally understood. It revolved around what needed to be done despite it. Night, again. The fire is embers. The room is a cave of shadows. The body, after another long day of truce and negotiation with its own limits, seeks the blankness of sleep. The mind lets go of the details, the unfinished task, the worry about the grain store, the child's cough. It releases them into the dark. There is no expectation of a better tomorrow, only the certainty of a similar one. The value of a life was not measured in happiness or comfort, but in endurance, in the simple, monumental fact of continuation. To wake again was the only goal, the only victory, and as the listener's own consciousness begins to blur at the edges, softening into the safe darkness of a modern room, this ancient rhythm continues, a faint, persistent echo beneath the quiet hum of the night, a rhythm of rising and resting, of hurt and persistence, a slow, patient beat against the vast, silent backdrop of time. The cold settles a little deeper into the stones of the hearth. The last ember winks out. A breath is drawn in the dark, held, and slowly released. Outside, an owl calls, a soft, questioning sound that receives no answer. The wind has died down. The world holds its breath. The darkness is not empty. It is a space filled with the small, steady sounds of a world at rest. The rustle of straw as a sleeper turns, not in comfort, but in search of a position where the ache is slightly less defined. The slow, rhythmic scratch of a branch, worn smooth by the wind, against a thatched roof. The distant, interminable dripping of water from the eaves into soft ground, marking time where there are no clocks. This is the sound of waiting. The night is long, but it is not silent. It is a corridor between one day of labor and the next, and the body travels through it fitfully, never fully arriving at the destination of rest. Within the body itself, a quieter world persists. The heart maintains its slow, stubborn beat, a labor of its own. The lungs draw in the chilled air, a faint rattle in the chest from a cough that has taken up permanent residence. In the gut, the modest meal of pottage and coarse bread continues its slow, difficult passage, a private, grinding work that offers no energy, only the faint warmth of digestion. A tooth, with its deep, secret decay, throbs in time with the pulse, a tiny, insistent lighthouse of pain in the dark sea of the body. These are not alarms. They are the idle machinery of a living thing, operating as it must, with the friction and complaint of constant use. Outside, the landscape settles into a deeper stillness. Fields, stripped bare by harvest or sleeping under a thin crust of frost, stretch out under the starlight. They are not peaceful, merely dormant. The soil holds the memory of the day's pressure, of feet and hooves and the bite of the plow. In the woods, the hierarchy of hunger continues unseen. An owl's successful strike is a brief, muffled end to a mouse's life. A fox moves on silent paws, its breath steaming in the air, its every sense tuned to the next possibility of food. The natural world does not sleep. It watches and waits and takes, a cycle of consumption as relentless as any human toil, but devoid of the consciousness of pain. It simply is. Back within the walls, as the deepest hour of the night passes, a change occurs. It is not a warming, but a further deepening of the cold. The residual heat from the long-dead fire has finally bled away, absorbed by the stones and the earth. The air feels sharp, crystalline. Breath forms visible plumes that hang briefly before dissolving. Those who sleep pull their thin covers tighter, tucking knees to chest, curling inward like fallen leaves. The body's priority shifts from rest to pure preservation, burning its meager stores of energy not to repair, but merely to maintain the fragile core temperature. This is a costly process, and it ensures that waking will come with a profound bodily debt, a fatigue that feels cellular. Dreams, when they come, are seldom fanciful. They are echoes of the day's labor, the repetitive motion of scything, the weight of a bucket on the shoulders, the frustration of a tangled rope. Or they are simple, visceral sensations. The overwhelming warmth of a sun that does not exist in the room, the taste of fresh milk, a childhood memory of running without a limp or a twinge. These are not narratives, but sensory fragments, the mind's attempt to process the constant input of strain and scarcity. They fade upon waking, leaving only a vague, lingering sense of dislocation, a whisper of something softer that is immediately swallowed by the reality of stiffened limbs and a full bladder. The need to relieve oneself is another small, cold ordeal. Rising from the pallet is a fresh negotiation. The floor is like ice. The journey to the corner of the room or out to the privy is a series of careful, painful steps. The exposed body flinches against the night air. This minor, daily humiliation is performed quickly, shivering, a reminder of the body's most basic and inconvenient demands. There is no privacy, only a shared understanding of this necessary vulnerability. Returning to the straw mattress offers no relief, only the slow process of convincing the chilled flesh to warm the same cold hollow it left behind. And then, a subtle shift. Not a sound, but a quality of the darkness. The pure black outside the single window begins to dilute to a shade of charcoal. This is the first, most tentative hint of dawn, a change noticed not by the eyes, which are closed, but by some ancient internal clock. The body, even in its exhausted sleep, begins its own subtle preparations. The heart rate shifts infinitesimally. The muscles, clenched against the cold, tighten further, as if bracing. The mind, still submerged, begins to stir with a low-grade awareness of what is to come. It is not an awakening, but a slow submersion rising toward the surface. In the manner, a servant tasked with the fire might already be stirring, pulling on clothes with numb fingers, carrying the heavy, iron-bound bucket of ashes from the previous night out into the yard. Their breath plumes in great gusts as they work to lay new tinder and strike a spark from flint and steel. This small, focused struggle, the chink of metal, the dry scrape, the first wisp of smoke, is the true beginning of the day for the household. It is a fight against the entrenched cold, a tiny, hopeful act of creation that will, for a few hours, push back the darkness and the chill. For now, it is a solitary, silent effort, a private battle won long before anyone else acknowledges the day. In the village, the first coughs begin. They are deep, rattling sounds, torn from sleep-constricted chests. They are answered by other coughs, a discordant chorus signaling the return of the community to consciousness. A baby cries, a thin, hungry sound. A dog barks once, then settles. These are the prelude. They are not yet the music of the day, but the tuning of the instruments, each sound a note of discomfort, need, or duty. The gray light grows stronger, defining shapes in the room. The curve of a pottery jug, the outline of a loom, the huddled forms under blankets. It is a light without warmth, a revealer of facts. It shows the dust motes hanging in the air, the cobwebs in the rafters, the worn patches on the soles of boots left by the door. It is an honest light, offering no flattery, no promise. It simply shows what is there, and what is there is a room occupied by bodies that must soon move, and tools that must soon be used. The mind now surfaces fully, not to thought, but to a catalogue of sensation. The specific, localized pains return with clarity. The knee that twists, the palm where a blister has broken, the molar that sends a sharp, warning signal at the mere clenching of a jaw. This is the morning inventory. It is performed not with despair, but with a practical assessment, like a craftsman checking his tools for damage before beginning work. Some items on the list are permanent, to be worked around. Others are new, to be monitored. All are accepted as part of the equipment for the day. And so, without ceremony, without a word, the day begins again. Not with a decision, but with a surrender to the inevitable. An elbow shifts. A deep breath is taken, held, released as a sigh that is neither sad nor resentful, merely factual. Eyelids open upon the same world they closed upon hours before. The cycle, which had only paused, now resumes its turn. The wind, as if waiting for this signal, picks up outside, murmuring against the wall. The world has been holding its breath. Now it exhales, and the long, familiar breath of labor begins again. The exhale of the world is a slow, constant pressure. It is the wind that never truly ceases, only changes its tone from a whisper to a groan as it funnels between dwellings. It carries scents from places unseen. The damp, fungal richness of the forest floor, the sharp, clean smell of rain moving in from the west, the distant, acrid hint of a wood fire from a homestead over the hill. This wind is the breath of the landscape itself, and it wears away at everything it touches: stone, wood, skin. It finds the gaps. It presses against the body as one moves from shelter to the open yard, a tangible resistance to be leaned into, a reminder that existence here is a form of gentle, perpetual contest. Morning's labor often began with animals, creatures whose needs were simpler but more immediate than human ones. The barn or byre was a cave of warmer, pungent air, thick with the smells of dung, straw, and the sweet, grassy scent of animal breath. Cows shifted their great weight, their hides steaming slightly in the chill. Their udders were full, tight bags that had to be emptied. The act of milking was a practiced routine of pressure and rhythm, the hands working in a steady, pulling cadence against the animal's warmth. The stool was low, forcing a deep squat that compressed the spine. Knees protested. The forehead might rest against the cow's flank. A moment of strange, passive intimacy with another living engine of survival. The sound of the first streams of milk hitting the wooden pail was a sign of success, a tiny, liquid wealth being produced. But the hands, gripping and squeezing, grew stiff and cold, the joints aching with the repetitive strain long before the task was done. For the chickens, it was a scattering of hard grain from a sack, a watchful eye for predators, and the search for eggs in dark, musty nesting boxes. The eggs were treasures, smooth and slightly warm, to be collected carefully in a basket lined with straw. This simple gathering required a constant bending and straightening, a toll paid by the lower back. For the pigs, it was the slopping out of kitchen scraps and the pouring of thin, soured wash, a chore that left the hands smelling of decay and the feet muddy. Every animal was a converter of poor resources into slightly better ones. Grass into milk, scraps into flesh, grain into eggs. Their care was an investment in future calories, a delay of hunger. The pain of the chores was the interest paid on that investment. Water again, always water. The walk to the well or stream was a journey made multiple times a day. The path was worn bare, a groove in the earth made by countless footsteps. The bucket, once filled, was a dead weight that demanded a specific posture. The spine straight but tilted, the shoulders bearing the yoke or the hand gripping the handle with a fierce, committed clench. The walk back was slower, each step measured to minimize the slosh that meant waste. The water was never for frivolity. It was for the animals, for the cooking pot, for the rough cleaning of tools. It was a heavy, liquid currency, and its transportation was a central pillar of the day's economy of effort. As the morning light solidified, revealing the texture of clouds and the precise, skeletal outlines of trees, the specialized work began. Not everyone was a field hand. The village, the manor, the monastery, each was a small ecosystem of interdependent panes. The carpenter in his shop, lit by a single high window, fought a different battle. His was a war against the resistance of wood. The saw's teeth bit into oak, each push and pull a jarring vibration that traveled up his arms, settling into his elbows. The mallet and chisel, used to carve joints, sent sharp concussions through the wrist with every strike. Sawdust, fine and golden, filled the air, catching in the throat and lining the lungs with an itchy, persistent dust. His back ached from hours of leaning over a bench. His eyes strained to follow a pencil line in the dim light. His hands were a gallery of old injuries. A missing fingertip, a pale scar from a gouge, knuckles thickened and forever stained with pitch and oil. The seamstress or weaver, often working in a corner of a dwelling, endured a more silent, concentrated agony. Her world was the tension of threads. Hours were spent in a hunched position, shoulders rounded forward, neck bent, eyes focused on the minute intersection of warp and weft. The fingers, constantly moving, grew sore at the tips, the skin sometimes splitting from the dryness of the wool and the constant friction. The lower back ached from the sustained, unsupported posture. The light, even from a window, was never quite enough, forcing her to squint, etching fine lines at the corners of her eyes. Her work produced warmth and covering for others, but it stole the suppleness from her own body, curling her in upon herself like a leaf around its central vein. For the blacksmith, the pain was elemental, a dialogue with fire and iron. The heat of the forge was a wall that pushed everyone else back, but he stood within it, his face a mask of soot and sweat. The radiant heat baked the front of his body while drafts chilled his back, a confusing assault on the senses. Lifting the heavy hammer was one strain. Bringing it down with accurate, repeated force on the glowing metal was another, a shock that was absorbed by the tendons of the shoulder and spine. Sparks flew, branding tiny, white-hot kisses on his arms and leather apron. The roar of the bellows, the ring of the hammer, the hiss of quenching. These were the loud sounds of his isolation. His hearing dulled over years. His body became a testament to heat and impact. His movements deliberate and powerful, each one costing a share of his finite strength. And throughout all these separate toils, the body's minor systems provided their own background commentary. Hunger was the constant, hollow conductor of this symphony of discomfort. It tightened the belly, caused a slight lightheadedness when standing up too quickly, made the hands tremble faintly during delicate work. Thirst was a drier, subtler note, a stickiness in the mouth ignored until a task was complete. Fatigue was the deep, underlying rhythm, the drumbeat that slowed all other movements as the day wore on. It was a weight in the limbs, a grit behind the eyelids, a growing reluctance in the mind to initiate any new action. The midday pause was not a rest, but a shift. The body, if working outdoors, might find a patch of ground in the lee of a wall, out of the wind. Sitting down was a controlled collapse. The back, freed from the obligation of staying upright, would curl gratefully, the spine complaining at the new configuration. Food was consumed without ceremony: bread, cheese, an onion, a piece of dried, tough meat. Chewing was work. Swallowing was a conscious act. The meal did not energize. It merely placed a small, heavy stone in the pit of the stomach, temporarily quieting the gnawing there. The break was short. To sit too long was to let the muscles stiffen into a new kind of pain, to feel the cold seep into bones now at rest. Rising again was often harder than the initial morning rise, a reluctant re-engagement with gravity and duty. The afternoon was a mirror of the morning, but viewed through a lens of depletion. The same tasks were performed, but with less resilience. The blistered hand was now raw. The sore back now burned with a deeper, more established fire. The bad tooth throbbed in time with the heartbeat, a persistent, nagging companion. The mind's focus, which had been sharp in the first hours, now blurred. Mistakes became more likely. A misstrike of the hammer, a miscount of the weave, a poorly placed step that turned an ankle on uneven ground. These mistakes carried their own immediate, sharp penalties of pain or wasted material, adding fresh frustration to the enduring ache. The light, as the day aged, grew long and golden. It was a beautiful light, but its beauty was irrelevant. It was a signal, a diminishing resource. Work became hurried, not with excitement, but with the grim pressure of a deadline imposed by the sun. There was so much still to do, and the darkness was an absolute curator of activity. Tools had to be cleaned and stored. Animals needed to be secured for the night. One final trip for water. The last of the daylight was used for the close, finicky work. Mending a harness by touch as much as sight, sorting seeds for the next day's planting, repairing a tear in a tunic. As the blue dusk gathered in the hollows and under the trees, the world began to draw inward. Smoke from evening fires rose straight up in the stilling air, a pillar connecting each household to the darkening sky. The interior of the home, which had been an empty space for most of the day, now became the entire universe. The fire was built up, not for cheer, but for survival against the night cold. Its light pushed the shadows into the corners, but could not reach the ceiling where the cold pooled like water. The evening meal was a repetition of the morning's, perhaps slightly more substantial, eaten in a weary silence broken only by the most necessary words. The body, now fully spent, registered the food as a burden, a final task for the digestive system before it could be left in peace. The transition to night was a gradual dimming, inside and out. The fire was allowed to fall, not extinguished, but banked to preserve a core of heat for the morning. The world beyond the door ceased to exist, becoming a black void of potential danger and cold. The rituals of settling were the reverse of the morning's preparations, performed with even greater economy of movement. Each action, removing outer layers, checking the door, lying down, was a direct subtraction from the body's last reserves. In the silence, the sounds of the night creatures grew distinct. But inside, the sounds were of the human mechanism winding down. The sigh as weight was released, the crack of a joint, the slow, deep breath that was almost a groan. The mind did not reflect. It simply released its hold on the day, letting the images of furrows, looms, and hearths dissolve into the dark. Consciousness did not end abruptly, but frayed at the edges, unraveling into a formless nothingness that was the closest thing to reprieve the world offered. The body, left to its own devices, continued its silent, internal labor of maintenance and slow decay, while outside, the uncaring stars wheeled on, and the earth, patient and immense, waited for the next turning of the light. The wheel of the stars turns without sound, a vast, silent machinery in the black vault above. Below, the world is reduced to its simplest elements: stone, wood, sleeping flesh, and the slow, patient cold. Time, unmeasured by clock or chime, passes as a gradual deepening of stillness. It is not empty time, but time filled with the slow processes of cooling and resting, of small creatures moving through the thatch, of moisture beating on a cold clay jug. The night is not a void, but a different kind of substance, thick and palpable, settling into the hollows of the landscape and the creases of blankets. Within the body, the metabolism of survival downshifts to its lowest register. The heart's tempo slows, a faint, persistent drum in the dark cavity of the chest. Breath becomes shallow, almost invisible, the lungs expanding just enough to sustain the dimming fire within. The pains of the day do not vanish. They change state. The sharp, localized sting of a fresh cut becomes a dull, warm pulse. The deep ache of overworked muscles softens into a generalized soreness, a numbness that is not absence of feeling, but feeling spread so thin it becomes a background hum. The mind, untethered from the immediate demands of labor, does not dream in stories, but in sensations, the phantom weight of a tool still in the hand, the echo of a repetitive motion in the joints, a sudden, inexplicable memory of warmth on the face from a summer long past. These are not visits from another world, but echoes from this one, reverberating in the quiet chamber of the unconscious. Outside, the infrastructure of the human world rests, but it does not sleep. The mill, its great will stilled, holds the memory of turning water in the chill dampness of its stones. The forge is a cave of dead ashes and cold iron, the anvil a dark block soaking up the moonlight that filters through a cracked shutter. The fields are a rumpled blanket, each furrow a frozen wave in a sea of dirt. Fences stand as stark, linear silhouettes against the slightly less dark sky, markers of a boundary that means nothing to the fox that slips beneath them. The village well is a circle of profound darkness, its bucket suspended over black, still water that reflects nothing. These human impositions on the land are merely shapes in the night, awaiting the return of purpose with the sun. And then the first true change. It is not yet light, but a subtle lessening of the absolute black at the eastern horizon. It is a dilution, as if a single drop of gray has been let fall into an inkwell. This change is sensed by creatures before humans. A bird, somewhere deep in the hedge, shifts on its perch and emits a single questioning chirp, a sound so soft it seems to be part of the silence itself. In the barn, a cow lows quietly, a deep, resonant complaint from a full udder. The world is not waking, but it is beginning to remember that it must. Inside, the body's internal clock, tuned to this primordial rhythm, begins its own faint stirring. It is not consciousness, but a shift in the tide of sleep. The deeper, formless void of the night's middle hours gives way to a lighter, more restless state. The sleeper turns not to find comfort, but in response to a growing awareness of discomfort. The hip ground against the hard frame, the arm gone numb from being lain upon. The cold, which had been a constant, now begins to feel actively invasive again, as the body's core temperature dips to its lowest point. This physiological nadir is a vulnerable hour, when the flame of life burns its dimmest. It is the hour when the old and the frail sometimes simply cease to stoke it, slipping from aching sleep into a final, cold silence. For most, it is just another valley to be passed through, a low point before the slow climb toward dawn. The quality of the sounds changes. The wind, which may have been still, often picks up in this pre-dawn hour, as if stirred by the coming change. It has a colder, sharper edge now, hissing through bare branches with a new insistence. The drips from the eaves seem to fall more frequently, as if the frost is melting ahead of the light. Within the dwelling, the sounds are of the body preparing, almost against its will. A stomach gurgling emptily, a dry cough rehearsed in sleep, the unconscious grind of a sore tooth. Then, a more definite signal. Not the gray light of dawn proper, but a faint, ambient glow that begins to erase the deepest shadows in the room. The shape of a window becomes a definite rectangle of lesser darkness. One can now see the mound of blankets, the outline of a chair, the pale disk of a face turned upward in sleep. This light has no direction, no source. It simply is, as if the world is being developed on a vast photographic plate. With it comes a new level of clarity to the body's complaints. The mind, drifting closer to the surface, begins to attach the aches to their sources. That is the lower back, that is the left knee, that is the bruise on the shin from yesterday's stumble. The catalog is reviewed with a passive, resigned acknowledgement. For the one whose duty it is to rise first, the mother with a nursing child, the servant charged with the fire, the baker who must start his oven. This is the moment of conscious decision. The will must now override the profound physical reluctance. It begins with the eyes opening. They feel gritty, dry. They stare at the familiar, dark beams overhead. A breath is taken, deeper than the sleep breaths, and held. This is the gathering of resources. Then the first movement. A hand emerging from the covers into the biting air to push back the rough wool. The shock of the cold on the skin is a sharp, clarifying pain. It is the first true sensation of the new day, a spark that ignites the reluctant engine of the body. The process of rising is a meticulous, painful reverse engineering of the previous night's collapse. Muscles, shortened and stiffened by hours of immobility, protest every centimeter of extension. Sitting up is a major logistical operation, involving the arms, a groan stifled in the throat, and a careful negotiation with gravity. The feet, when they meet the floor, feel the shock of the cold earth or stone travel instantly up the legs. The first steps are a stiff, shuffling gait, the body relearning balance, testing which limbs will bear weight today. The fire is the first creation of the day. In the absolute chill of the room, the task of striking a spark from flint and steel becomes a desperate, fumbling struggle. Fingers are clumsy, numb. The tinder must be dry, the angle precise. The tiny, glowing coal that is finally nurtured into life is a victory of monumental importance. It is blown upon with cupped hands, fed with slivers of wood, sheltered from drafts. This miniature sun, this fragile, dancing light, is the cornerstone upon which the next several hours of human existence will be built. Its heat is negligible at first, a mere illusion of warmth on the face, but its light is everything. It defines the hearth as the center of the world, pushing the night back into the corners. As this small drama plays out in one dwelling, it is repeated in others. Chimneys, cold for hours, begin to issue thin, hesitant threads of smoke that are quickly torn apart by the wind. The village, which was a collection of dark, silent mounds, begins to prick with points of orange light, like embers scattered on dark wool. These lights do not signify joy or community. They signify the resumption of the daily struggle against the elements. They are signals of endurance. With the fire established, the other morning rituals proceed with a grim efficiency. Water is heated, if there is enough to spare for such luxury. More often, cold water is splashed on the face, a brutal awakening that sets the teeth on edge. The putting on of the day's clothes is the donning of a damp, cold armor. The lacing of boots over sore, cold feet is a final act of commitment to the day's labor. By the time one steps outside, the body is already engaged in a full-scale campaign, marshaling its diminished resources against the cold, the hunger, and the anticipation of strain. The sky in the east is now banded with color, a wash of pale lemon against the retreating indigo. It is beautiful in a way that is entirely separate from human concern. The beauty is a fact, like the hardness of the ground. It is observed, perhaps, in a fleeting glance by the woman emptying night soil into the midden, or the man heading to the well with his buckets. But it is not enjoyed. It is simply another piece of information about the world. The day will be clear. The wind is from the north. The cold will hold. And so, the great wheel, which had slowed to near stoppage in the deep night, finds its groove again. The first real sounds of labor begin. The chop of an axe splitting kindling, the creak of a well pulley, the low conversation of men heading to the same field. The pains of the body, now fully engaged, settle into their familiar functional patterns. They are no longer a prelude, but the constant accompaniment. The long, slow breath of the medieval day has been drawn in during the night. Now it is exhaled, a sigh of effort that will last until the light fails once more. The stars fade, not with a flicker, but by becoming gradually less certain, until they are simply gone, and the vast, impersonal blue of the daytime sky takes their place, presiding over another cycle of toil and quiet endurance. The blue of the sky is not a blanket, but a dome of sheer, cold distance. It offers no warmth, only a vast, empty clarity against which the minutiae of labor stand in sharp relief. A spiderweb, strung between a fence post and a dormant rose bush, becomes a galaxy of dew and geometry, ignored by the passing figure whose focus is rooted to the mud of the path. The mind, in this morning light, operates with a narrow, purposeful focus. It does not wander to the horizon or contemplate the cloud shapes. It calculates the number of steps to the far field, inventories the remaining seed in the sack, anticipates the dull protest the lower back will voice upon the first lift of the day's fifth water yoke. Thought is physical, tethered to the immediate task and the body's capacity to perform it. Within the workshop of the cooper, the world is scent and texture. The air is thick with the smell of green wood, oak and ash, a moist, bitter scent that coats the tongue. His hands move over staves, feeling for imperfections the eye might miss. The plane shaves away curls of wood, their pale innards exposed to the air. His shoulders roll in a familiar, weary rhythm, the muscles along his spine nodding with the push and pull. The sound is a long, tearing whisper, a cascade of thin, wooden ribbons piling at his feet. His world is this barrel, its curvature a problem of pressure and fit. The pain in his wrists from twisting the driving hoop into place is not an injury. It is the feeling of the work itself, a sensation as intrinsic to barrel making as the smell of the wood. His success is measured in the absence of leakage, a negative space where his effort has prevented loss. Elsewhere, the shepherd's day is a slow migration across contours of pain and monotony. His is a solitude punctuated by animal sounds and the endless, searching pressure of the wind on the high pastures. His legs carry him over uneven ground, a constant, low-grade negotiation with slope and stone that leaves the muscles of his thighs burning by midday. His knees absorb the shock of descent. His back is a pillar for the weight of a lamb, should he need to carry one. The cold here is a penetrating, damp cold that seeps through all layers, finding the seams at neck and wrist. His thoughts are not his own. They are extensions of his flock's needs, the direction of the wind, the quality of the grass, the shady spot for the heat of the afternoon. His body's aches are the echoes of the land's topography, mapped onto his own flesh. The sharp cry of a hawk is not a symbol of freedom, but a calculation of threat. His rest, when he takes it, is a vigilant stillness, his body grateful for the pause but already stiffening in the open air. In the monastic infirmary, pain is given a room of its own, and a witness. Here, the generalized ache of existence is concentrated into specific, named afflictions: the fevered brow, the swollen joint, the festering wound. The monk tasked with care moves quietly, his own discomfort from hours of kneeling in prayer a private offering as he changes dressings or administers herbal drafts. The air smells of vinegar, of drying herbs, of the sweet rot scent of sickness. The suffering here is not ignored or normalized. It is observed, catalogued, and placed within a divine framework. A groan is not merely a sound of pain, but a plea or a penance. The caregiver's hands, as they wipe a brow or lift a cup, perform a ritual as structured as the liturgy. The pain of the patient and the fatigue of the caregiver become intertwined in a silent dialogue about mortality, their shared humanity reduced to the basic transactions of tenderness and endurance within stone walls. Back in the village, the work of maintenance is endless, a fighting retreat against entropy. The thatcher on a roof is a silhouette against the sky, his world a sloping plain of straw and old, spongy wood. His knees are perpetually bent, his balance a constant muscular tension. The dried reeds are sharp, leaving fine, burning cuts on his hands and forearms. The sun, when it emerges, bakes the back of his neck. The wind threatens his perch. His pain is one of sustained, precarious positioning, a full-body effort to remain attached to a surface that wants to shed him. Below, the woman mending a wattle wall pushes new, flexible withes through a lattice of old, brittle ones. Her fingers, skilled and strong, are nonetheless scraped raw by the rough wood. The damp clay daub she pushes into the gaps is cold and gritty, working its way under her nails. Her task is one of closure, of filling gaps, of making the boundary between inside and outside whole again. The ache in her shoulders is the ache of making a barrier against the world. As the sun reaches its zenith, the light becomes a weight. It presses down, flattening shadows, drawing the scent of hot earth and crushed grass into the air. For those laboring outdoors, the body's struggle shifts from combating cold to managing heat. Sweat is now the constant companion, tracing paths through the dust on skin, stinging the eyes, making hands slippery on tool handles. Thirst becomes a central, demanding preoccupation. The mouth grows parched, the tongue thick. The water from the skin, now warm and tasting of leather, is a poor remedy, but it is the only one. The mind slows, thoughts moving like flies in the heavy air. The repetitive motions of work, the swing of the scythe, the turn of the soil, become hypnotic, a way to bypass conscious thought and let the body operate on the memory of rhythm alone. The pain of exertion is now a hot, fluid feeling, a burning in the muscles that merges with the heat of the sun. In the relative dimness of a woodworker's shed, the heat is still present, but stale and trapped, smelling of sawdust and resin. The craftsman's focus is absolute, his world contained within the line he is carving. His eyesight strains, the detail before him consuming his entire field of vision. His hearing is attuned to the subtle sounds of his tools, the whisper of a sharp blade, the clean thock of a chisel driven by a mallet, each a sign of correct execution. The pain here is one of intense, constrained concentration. The crick in the neck from holding a single position, the tension in the jaw, the soreness of the eyes. A mistake is not just a waste of material. It is a rupture in this focused universe, a jarring return to the broader world of fallibility and cost. The day does not build to a climax. It accumulates mass. Each task completed is not a victory, but a weight removed from one side of a scale and placed upon the other, the scale of fatigue. The body is a ledger, and by afternoon the debt of energy is profound. Movements become not just painful but inefficient. A walked path feels longer. A bucket feels heavier. A simple decision where to place a tool, when to take a drink, requires a noticeable effort of will. The soul of the day is no longer in the initiation of work, but in the persistence of it, in the grim, unspoken determination to meet the quota of daylight with a corresponding quota of effort. The fading of the light is a slow, granular process. It is not the sudden flipping of a switch, but a leaching away of color and definition. The vibrant green of a field becomes a muted gray-green, then a mere suggestion of texture. The distant line of trees melts into a unified, dark mass. Sounds, which had been absorbed by the day's bustle, begin to carry again in the cooling air. A distant shout, the barking of a dog, the closing of a heavy door. This is the signal for the day's final, hurried consolidation. Work does not stop because it is finished, but because it is becoming impossible to see. Tools are gathered, their shapes familiar to the hands in the gloom. The walk back from field or workshop is a procession of silhouettes, heads down, steps heavy with the day's accrued weight. The transition from open sky to enclosed hearth is a contraction of existence. The world, which had stretched to the horizon, now shrinks to the radius of firelight. The cold, held at bay during the day's exertion, now advances with confident swiftness. The fire, fed anew, is a beacon not of cheer, but of necessity. Its light paints the tired faces around it in flickering ochre and deep shadow, highlighting the lines of fatigue, the dirt ground into the skin, the weary set of the mouth. Conversation, if it happens, is of practicalities. A hinge that needs mending, a rumor of a price at market, the health of a ewe. Words are sparse, functional. Laughter is rare. A short, harsh sound that seems to surprise even the one who makes it. The body, in this final hour of consciousness, is a settled landscape of weariness. The individual pains, the blister, the stiff knee, the sore back, have blended into a single, unanimous declaration of exhaustion. The mind, freed from the demands of coordination and danger, does not turn to reflection or fantasy. It becomes a passive receiver of sensation. The heat on the shins, the deep ache in the bones, the gritty dryness of the eyes. The act of eating the evening's portion is mechanical, a final duty. The taste is unimportant. The function is everything. The journey to the sleeping pallet is the last migration. It is performed with a slow, automatic precision. Each movement, the removal of the outer tunic, the banking of the fire, the final glance at the barred door, is a ritual of surrender. To lie down is not to seek comfort, but to submit to the body's final, non-negotiable demand. The darkness that closes in as the eyes shut is the same darkness that hangs over the fields, fills the forest, and pools in the valley bottoms. It is the common destination of all things, and as the fragile rhythm of breath steadies into the shallow tide of sleep, the individual once again dissolves into the vast, patient, and unfeeling continuity of the world, where the only truth is the turning of the earth away from, and then back toward, the distant, impersonal sun. The turning is imperceptible. There is no lurch, no sigh from the planet's core. The world simply continues its silent roll from shadow into deeper shadow, a progression measured not in minutes, but in the slow accumulation of celestial degrees. In the absolute dark, the concept of interior and exterior dissolves. The stone of the wall is as cold as the earth outside. The air within the room is but a captive piece of the night, still and dense. The body, in its state of suspension, becomes a territory unto itself. The heartbeat is a distant, muffled drum from a faraway hill. The circulation of blood is a slow river moving through frozen landscapes of muscle and sinew. The pains are not gone, but have receded to their sources, like watchfires burned low, each marking a site of old injury or fresh strain, glowing dimly in the private dark of the flesh. Beyond the village, in the forest that presses close, the night is not a cessation but a shifting of power. The domain of sight, so crucial to human work, is relinquished. In its place, sound and scent become the primary texts. The rustle in the undergrowth is a story of hunger and stealth. The crisp snap of a twig under a hoof is a proclamation of presence. The air carries messages too subtle for human senses. The musk of a fox, the electric scent of ozone before a distant storm, the damp, fecund odor of moss consuming a fallen log. Here, pain is immediate and functional. The rabbit caught in the snare experiences a sharp, singular agony. Then nothing. The owl's talons impart a terminal shock. This is a world of clean, efficient suffering without memory or anticipation, a cycle of consumption where pain is merely the brief signal of transition from one state of matter to another. Near the water, whether stream or pond, the darkness has a different quality, cool, moist, and murmuring. The water itself never sleeps. It works perpetually at its banks, carrying away microscopic grains of soil, polishing stones, whispering around roots. Frogs call out in pulsed, rhythmic chorus, a sound that seems to make the darkness vibrate. Insects skim the black surface, their lives measured in hours, their ends coming in a sudden, watery splash. For a human, to be near water at night was to feel a profound vulnerability. It was a pathway that could carry sound for miles, a reflective surface that could betray movement, a borderland where solidity gave way to a cold, drowning embrace. The ache of dampness in the bones was the legacy of such places, a deep chill that no fire could ever fully scour, settling into the joints as a permanent, damp reminder of the world's fluid indifference. In the manor, where stone was thicker and tapestries hung heavy on the walls, the night's character was one of isolated grandeur. The great hall was a cavern of echoing space, the hearth a dark mouth. The cold here was not a biting wind, but a still, profound presence that rose from the flagstones and descended from the high, vaulted ceilings. A servant sleeping on a pallet in an alcove might dream of the warmth of the kitchens, but awake to the same essential chill as the peasant in his hut, merely framed by more imposing architecture. For the lord in his chamber, concerns were less of immediate physical discomfort. Though his bed might be softer, the drafts still found their way, and more of a mental calculus. The night was a time for the gnaw of political anxiety, for the tally of debts and alliances, for the quiet fear of betrayal or poor harvest. His pains were projections, aches of the mind that tightened the stomach and frayed the edges of sleep, a different flavor of the same fundamental human unrest. And for the sentry on the wall, or the watchman making his rounds, the night was a profession. His pain was one of sustained alertness in a void. The cold was his constant opponent, seeping through layers of wool and leather, numbing his fingers around the shaft of his spear. His eyes strained to find movement in a mosaic of shadows. His ears pricked at every sound, forced to categorize it as harmless or threat. His legs grew stiff from standing, his back ached from the weight of his gear. His world was the narrow circuit of his duty, a tiny island of purpose in a sea of blackness. His vigilance was a thin, human flame against the overwhelming dark, and the cost was measured in fatigue so deep it felt like a sickness, in a loneliness that was as tangible as the stone of the parapet under his hand. As the deepest hour yielded, a subtle reordering began, not with light, but with sound. The first birdsong was not a melody, but a single, questioning note, as if testing the integrity of the silence. It was often answered by another, and then another, a hesitant network of communication spreading through the still black woods and hedgerows. This avian dialogue had no concern for the human world below. It was the night shift clocking out, the day shift reporting in. Inside dwellings, the sounds of human rest changed timbre. The deep, regular breathing of exhausted sleep gave way to more fitful patterns, to sighs, to the subconscious clearing of a throat. The body was preparing its systems, stoking its metabolic fires in anticipation of demand. Then the light. It began not as illumination, but as a weakening of the dark's authority. The black softened to charcoal at the eastern edge of the world. Shapes inside the room, the bench, the loom, the sleeping form of a child, regained their outlines, not by being lit, but by ceasing to be part of the uniform darkness. This was the world returning in monochrome, With this grainy visibility came a new, more precise awareness of the body's condition. The mind, now drifting near the surface, could take inventory with a cruel clarity. The specific tooth that ached, the exact location of the bruise on the thigh, the stiff hinge of the right knee. This was not a time for philosophy or resolve. It was a time for assessment, for the quiet, internal acknowledgement of the resources available and the debts owed. For the one who must rise first, this was the moment of fracture. The will, a fragile thing, had to crack the solid block of bodily reluctance. It often began with the eyes opening to stare at the familiar, dark geometry of the roof beams. A calculation was performed, weighing the warmth of the cocoon against the certain, multiplying pains of the day to come. The decision was never a happy one. It was a surrender to inevitability. The first movement, an arm extricating itself from the blankets, was a breach, a letting in of the cold that committed the rest of the body to follow. The shock was bracing, a painful baptism into the new cycle. The rekindling of the fire was the first creative act of the day, a small defiance against entropy. The hands, clumsy with cold, performed the ritual of flint and steel. The spark was a tiny, miraculous birth, nurtured with breath and tinder into a flickering life. This new flame was more than heat. It was a point of orientation, a confirmation that the world could still be shaped, however slightly, by human effort. Its light painted a small, golden circle on the floor, a promise that the vast, indifferent night could be held at bay for a few more hours. Outside, the world continued to clarify itself without passion. The gray light revealed the frost on the thatch, a million silver needles. It showed the mud of the path, churned and frozen in ruts. It delineated the skeletal branches of the trees against the lightning sky. There was no beauty in this, only information. The beauty was an irrelevance, a layer of meaning the exhausted mind had no energy to apply. The day was not a gift, but a fact, a space of time to be filled with the slow, dogged work of staying alive. And as the forms of men and women began to move along the paths, heading to fields, to streams, to workshops, their movements were the first tentative strokes of a brush on the vast, blank canvas of the daylight hours. They did not paint a picture. They inscribed a record of effort. Each step, each lift, each pull was a mark made against the fading of the light, a testament to the persistent, unglamorous, and utterly normal will to endure. The sky, now a pale, featureless bowl, witnessed it all without comment, and the earth, ancient and patient, received the pressure of their footsteps once again. The pale bowl of the sky holds no promises. It is merely a lid, a vast, curved ceiling of ash and milk that diffuses the light without granting direction. Beneath it, the world wakes not to possibility, but to repetition. The footsteps that trace the path to the fields are not embarking on a journey. They are retracing a groove worn by a generation of feet before them. The body knows this path. The right foot always finds that slightly sunken stone. The left always avoids the root that tripped a cousin last spring. The walk is a meditation in monotony, a space where the mind can fully inhabit the catalog of aches that travel with it. The tightness in the left hip, the persistent pinch between the shoulder blades, the dull throb of a heel where a blister never quite heals. The work itself is a dialogue with materials that resist. The soil is not an ally. It is a dense, particulate substance that must be convinced to yield. The wooden handle of the spade is smoothed by generations of palms, but it still transfers the shock of striking a buried stone up through the wrists and into the elbows. The back learns a specific, curved geometry for this task, a shape that contradicts its natural alignment, a compromise that will exact its payment by dusk. There is no soundtrack but the rasp of breath, the chunk of metal in earth, the distant, similar sounds of others engaged in the same silent persuasion. The mind does not wander to songs or stories. It fixates on the immediate geometry of the task. The spacing of the row, the depth of the hole, the arc of the swing. Thought becomes physical, a calculation of leverage and fatigue. For the woman at the grindstone, the world contracts to a circle of gritty friction. The stone is heavy, its rotation a slow, grinding resistance that must be overcome with the whole weight of the body, leaning into the wooden bar. The sound is a low, constant whir, a vibration that travels up through the wood and into the bones. Wheat kernels are reduced to coarse flour, a cloud of fine dust rising to coat her arms, her face, the front of her dress. It mixes with sweat, itching terribly. Her shoulders burn with the sustained effort. Her lower back aches from the stance. Her world is this monotony of turning and pouring, a cycle that transforms grain into dust, strength into sustenance, and comfort into a distant, forgotten concept. The satisfaction is not in the action, but in its conclusion, the sack of flour that represents hours of this singular bodily investment. In the tannery, set prudently downwind, existence is defined by odor and a slow chemical violence. The stench of curing hides and the acrid tang of alum are an atmosphere one wears, a perfume that seeps into wool and hair and skin, marking the worker as surely as a brand. The hides are heavy, sodden, resistant things. Moving them from vat to rack is a brutal exercise in wet weight, straining the back and shoulders. The hands, constantly immersed in foul solutions, become reddened, cracked, and painful, the skin peeling in ragged strips. The work is not skilled so much as it is endured. The pain here is a raw, exposed feeling, a constant abrasion against foulness and physical strain, a life lived at the edge of putrefaction, transforming death into usable leather through a process of personal defilement. The child sent to gather firewood in the copse experiences a different scale of misery. The cold here is sharp, for the sun barely penetrates the bare branches. The task is one of constant bending and searching, the eyes scanning the ground for fallen branches, the fingers going numb as they break twigs and gather armfuls. The bundle, when assembled, is always too large to carry comfortably. It scratches the neck and face, its weight dragging on underdeveloped shoulders. The walk home is a battle against imbalance and fatigue, a small lesson in the economy of effort. The warmth the wood will provide comes at the direct cost of the child's own comfort and energy. There is no play in this. It is a small, serious contribution to survival, and the aches in the young muscles are an early introduction to the lifelong conversation between need and hurt. As the day matures, the light loses its thin, gray quality and gains a flat, white intensity. It reflects off puddles, off pale stone, making the eyes squint. For the cartwright repairing a wheel in the yard, this light is both a tool and an adversary. It helps him see the crack in the spoke, the wear on the iron rim. But it also heats the metal of his tools and bakes the back of his neck. His work is a puzzle of pressure and joinery. The hammer blows to seat the iron tire onto the wooden wheel are tremendous, jolting concussions that he delivers with a full-body swing, the shock traveling from the tool through his arms and into his core. His world is one of precise violence, the application of great force to a specific point to achieve a fragile unity. His body absorbs the violence of this precision, his skeleton the framework that channels these shocks. The pain is a feeling of being slowly pounded into the ground, his own solidity tested with every strike. In the dim, quiet scriptorium of the monastery, pain is sublimated into a slow, meticulous burn. The monk's back curves over the vellum, a posture held for hours. The hand that guides the quill cramps, the fingers locking into a claw around the feather. The eyes, straining in the imperfect light to form perfect, uniform letters, grow dry and sore. A headache often blooms behind the temples, a tight band of pressure from the intense, unblinking focus. Here, discomfort is not an obstacle to work. It is part of the work's texture, a bodily offering alongside the intellectual one. The sting of the cramping hand, the ache in the spine. These are the mundane counterparts to the spiritual struggle for perfection, a physical transcription of devotion onto the vulnerable parchment of the self. The sun's passage overhead is marked only by the slow crawl of shadows, not by any change in the tenor of labor. The body's signals become more insistent. Hunger is no longer a hollow space but an active gnawing, a distracting grip in the gut. Thirst is a parched tightness in the throat. The accumulated fatigue whispers to the muscles, urging them to cease, to rest, to surrender. The will to continue becomes a separate entity, a stubborn countervoice that speaks not of dreams or hopes, but of simple necessity. The field must be finished, the wheel must be whole, the vellum must be filled. This internal negotiation is the true labor of the afternoon, a psychological weight added to the physical one. When the shadows finally lengthen, stretching across the ground like tired giants, the pace does not quicken with urgency, but with a kind of grim finality. There is a palpable sense of the light as a resource being depleted, like grain from a sack. Tasks are not completed with flourish, but abandoned at a logical stopping point. The end of a row, the setting of a final stitch, the fitting of the last spoke. Tools are cleaned with a perfunctory roughness, their surfaces cold to the touch. The walk back is a silent parade of depletion. Conversations are monosyllabic if they happen at all. The energy for speech has been spent. The hearth, once again, becomes the center of the universe. But the warmth it offers is superficial, a kindness that touches only the skin. It cannot reach the deep chill in the bones, the fatigue in the marrow. The evening meal is consumed with a functional haste. Taste is irrelevant. The goal is to quiet the animal complaint of the stomach. The body, now at rest, begins its full, honest accounting. Every strained muscle, every bruised spot, every raw patch of skin announces itself with a clarity that was muffled by the day's motion. Sitting still is its own form of torment, as stiffness sets in with terrifying speed. The preparation for sleep is a reverse alchemy, turning the waking human back into a vulnerable, bundled form. Each movement is an effort. The mind, now freed from the demands of coordination, does not rise to thought. It sinks. It becomes a passive lake, reflecting only the physical sensations of the moment. The itch of wool, the pressure of the straw against a hip, the distant, rhythmic ache of a tooth. There is no planning for tomorrow, no review of today. There is only the slow, gravitational pull toward unconsciousness. And as the last conscious thought dissolves, a vague awareness of the fire's scent, a final register of the cold on an exposed ear, the individual once again ceases to be a distinct entity. They rejoin the slow, breathing darkness of the world. The night is not a respite, but a different phase of existence, a time when the body fights its silent, microscopic battles of repair and decay, and the earth continues its immense, patient turning, indifferent to the small, aching lives it carries on its back through the vast and silent corridors of the stars. The wheel turns, and the groove deepens, and the darkness gathers, ready to be worn away again by the slow, grinding friction of another dawn. The silence between stars is not empty. It is a presence, a weight of pure absence that presses down upon the world, compressing the sounds of the night into sharp, distinct events. A twig snap is a gunshot. The scuttle of a beetle across dry leaves is a procession. In this acoustic clarity, the human dwelling becomes a resonator for the body's quiet machinery. The gurgle of digestion, the soft whistle of breath through a stuffy nose, the unconscious grind of a tooth. These internal rhythms are the private music of a life sustained, a fragile percussion against the infinite quiet. Within the body's deep tissues, the work of repair is a desperate, limited salvage operation. It is not a restoration to a prior state of wholeness, but a frantic patching, a binding of torn fibers with crude, fibrous scar tissue, a mobilization of resources to the sites of greatest damage. The blister on the heel is quarantined, fluids drawn away to reduce the swelling. The strained muscle in the shoulder is flooded with a dull, metabolic ache as it attempts to knit itself back together, knowing full well it will be torn apart again within hours. The body prioritizes not comfort, but function. It allocates its meager energy not to healing, but to making the machinery operational for one more cycle. Sleep is not the physician, but the foreman of a shoddy, overworked repair crew working by the faintest of lights. Outside, the world operates on older, more absolute principles. In the frozen furrow, a worm succumbs to the cold, its simple life extinguished, its body becoming a tiny offering to the soil it once aerated. On a bare branch, a lichen, a partnership of fungus and algae, grows imperceptibly, a conquest measured in centuries, a testament to a patience so vast it mocks human notions of time and suffering. The wind, which had stilled, often returns in the hour before dawn, born of the temperature differential between the cooling earth and the slightly less cold air. It is a clean, searching wind, devoid of scent, that scours the landscape, whispering of distances and emptiness. It finds the gap in the wattled wall and enters the dwelling not as a blast, but as a thin, focused blade of cold that slices across a sleeping face, a precise and impersonal reminder of the outside. For the mother lying awake beside a restless child, the night is measured in increments of warmth and worry. The child's feverish heat against her side is a small sun of concern. Her own fatigue is a thick wool blanket she cannot cast off. Her mind, too tired for coherent prayer, repeats fragmented pleas and practical thoughts in a muddled loop. The pain in her own body, the familiar ache in her hips from childbirth, the soreness in her arms from yesterday's churning, is relegated to a distant background. Her consciousness is a narrow beam focused entirely on the rhythm of the child's breath, on the minute shifts in its temperature. Her vigil is a silent, aching offering, a pain that is wholly attentive and self-forgetting. The dawn, when it comes, will not bring relief, only a change in the format of her care. In the forge, long cold, the absence of heat is a tangible quality. The anvil is a block of absorbed chill. The tools hang in a dark, still life, their purposes suspended. The ashes are a gray, powdery corpse of yesterday's fire. This space, so full of roar and violence by day, is now a chapel to inertia. A mouse, emboldened by the silence, skitters across the dirt floor, finding nothing. The night here is an erasure, a daily lesson in impermanence. The mastery of the blacksmith, his power to shape the world with heat and force, is shown to be a temporary lease, revoked every dusk. His kingdom is reclaimed by the cold and the quiet, his achievements merely arrangements of metal that will also, in time, succumb to rust. High in the dovecot, a different kind of stillness reigns. The soft cooing of the birds has ceased. They are rounded balls of feather and warmth, heads tucked under wings, dreaming whatever dreams pigeons dream. Their world is one of simple coordinates: home, food, flight. Their pains are instantaneous. The sharp stab of a hawk's talon, the abrupt snap of a neck from a well-thrown stone. They do not accumulate suffering. They do not dread the dawn. They simply exist within it. Their quiet presence in the tower is a symbol of something just out of human reach. A life unburdened by memory or anticipation, where pain is a singular event, not a constant state. As the blackness at the horizon begins to fray, yielding to the first suggestion of slate gray, a subtle tension enters the world. It is the tension of a bowstring being slowly, inexorably drawn. The shadows within the room, which had been soft and deep, gain a sharpness at their edges. Objects seem to hold themselves more rigidly, awaiting inspection. The body, still submerged in sleep, responds to this cosmic cue. The pulse ticks fractionally faster. The breath deepens, preparing to fuel motion. The mind, deep in its dreamless swamp, begins to stir toward the surface, drawn upward by the gravitational pull of the coming day. The moment of waking is a small, personal fracture. It is the self breaking through a thin sheet of ice. There is no gentle transition. One moment there is nothing. The next, there is the cold, the ache, the weight of the blanket, the familiar, oppressive knowledge of self and duty. The eyes open onto the same patch of roof they closed upon. The first thought is not a thought at all, but a sensory composite. Cold, stiff, hungry, hurt. It is a single, unified word spoken by the flesh. The will to move is a separate, weaker thing, a minor clerk arguing with a powerful, entrenched bureaucracy of pain and reluctance. The victory of rising is a Pyrrhic one. Each movement is a concession. Swinging the legs over the side of the pallet concedes to gravity. Placing the feet on the floor concedes to the cold. Straightening the spine concedes to the protest of 100 tightened muscles. The body is not commanded. It is negotiated with, each action purchased with a coin of discomfort. The walk to the hearth is a stiff procession, a body relearning the simple mechanics of locomotion against the protests of its own architecture. The making of the fire is the first creative act, but it feels less like creation and more like a reluctant stoking of an obligation. The hands fumble. The spark is elusive. The chill has stolen dexterity. When the flame finally catches, it is not a triumph, but a minor logistical success. Its light does not cheer. It simply reveals. It shows the dust on the floor, the emptiness of the pot, the weary faces of others engaged in the same silent, morning struggle. This shared light is a confession of mutual hardship, not a beacon of community. Stepping outside is to be immersed in the day's first full truth. The air is a cold, clear wash. The sky is a vast, pale shell, featureless and distant. The landscape is revealed in all its unadorned reality. The mud, the bare trees, the brown fields, the smoke from other hearths climbing straight up in the windless dawn. There is no filter of hope or beauty. It is a world stripped to its functional bones. The path to the well, to the field, to the workshop is not a beginning but a continuation. The footsteps that fall upon it are not steps into a new day, but the next in an infinite series, wearing the groove a little deeper, the body a little thinner. And so the great engine of survival coughs, sputters, and turns over once more. The sounds begin, the chop, the draw of water, the low greeting, not as a chorus of purpose, but as the isolated clicks and ticks of a machine engaging its gears. Each person becomes a component in a slow, widespread mechanism designed for a single purpose: to persist, to take the resources of the world, the soil, the wood, the water, the flesh of animals, and convert them, through the application of pained and weary effort, into one more day of existence. The sun, when it finally clears the horizon, does not bring warmth or energy. It merely provides better illumination for the task, casting long, stark shadows that are themselves merely the absence of light, a fitting metaphor for a life defined by the presence of weariness and the absence of ease. The work begins again, not with a shout, but with a sigh woven into the very fabric of the morning air. The sigh is not a sound, but a quality in the atmosphere, a slight denseness to the cold air that seems to hold the collective resignation of every waking soul. It is the precursor to motion, the invisible current that pulls bodies from their pallets and into the rigid patterns of the day. Light, now a steady, gray fact, performs its duty without passion. It exposes the textures of hardship, the grain of splintered wood on the bucket handle, the intricate network of cracks in a dried mud path, the weary, line topography of a face bent over a task. This is light as an examiner, not an illuminator. The first substantive act for many is a confrontation with animal need. In the byre, the beasts shift and sigh in their own language, their great bodies generating a fog of warm breath in the chill. The milkmaid's hands, already stiff, must work with a practiced, rhythmic tenderness that belies their ache. The cow's flank is a wall of living heat, but the stool is a tiny island of discomfort, forcing a precarious, back-straining perch. The ping of milk hitting the empty pail is a promising rhythm, but it is a rhythm purchased by the cramp in the fingers and the cold seeping up through the thin soles of her shoes into the bones of her feet. Her world is this triangle of beast, bucket, and bending spine, a closed system of organic exchange where her pain is the unrecorded tax. For the beekeeper, approaching the skeps with a care that borders on reverence, the morning holds a different kind of potential sting. The low hum from the woven straw domes is a warning and a promise. Smoke is used, a gentle persuasion to mask alarm pheromones. His movements are slow, deliberate, a meditation in avoiding sudden pain. But stings are inevitable. They come as sharp, burning jabs on the hands and wrists, a venomous heat that blooms under the skin. He works through them, his body accepting these tiny, fiery insults as part of the transaction for golden sweetness. His pain is acute, specific, and layered over the deeper, older aches in his joints from years of cautious, bent-over work. He harvests not just honey, but a compound of sweetness and suffering bound together in the wax comb. At the riverbank, the fuller's work is a battle of saturation and weight. Cloth, soaked in urine and water, is beaten and trampled. The air is thick with the ammoniac stench. His legs, submerged in the icy current or the foul vat, are numb pillars. His arms rise and fall with the heavy paddle, a monotonous, jarring motion that loosens teeth and vibrates the skull. The cold and the stench are aggressive, invading senses and pores. His is a pain of immersion, of being permeated by the frigid and the foul, his body becoming an extension of the cleansing process, itself left feeling raw and defiled. The clean cloth he produces will carry no trace of his chilled bones or his aching shoulders. In the dim quiet of the almshouse, pain is a collective murmur. Here, those whose bodies have broken under the strain are gathered, not for healing, but for a managed conclusion. The air smells of stale rushes, unwashed flesh, and a sour note of despair. Aches are not worked through here. They are inhabited. An old field hand's back is a frozen arc of agony, never to straighten again. A spinster's fingers are gnarled claws, their useful life spent. Their suffering is passive, a slow erosion. It is witnessed by others whose own pains are a preview of this final state. There is little conversation. Communication is through sighs, through the shift of a body seeking a less torturous position, through the blank, endured silence that hangs heavier than the rafters. The morning light here is not a beginning, but a revealer of decay, showing the dust motes dancing over still forms, outlining the sharp ridges of collarbones under thin blankets. For the child sent to scare birds from the newly sown field, the pain is one of exposed monotony. Armed with a clapper or a sling, they are a small, solitary sentinel. The cold wraps around them. Their feet grow numb in the damp soil. Their task is one of frantic, sporadic movement. Running, shouting, waving, interspersed with long periods of shivering stillness. The loneliness is a chill that goes deeper than the wind. Their growing body complains of the inactivity and the sudden bursts of effort. Their mind, too young to have fully accepted the yoke of necessity, wanders into fantasies of warmth and food, making the reality of the cold field and their own empty stomach a sharper misery. This is an apprenticeship in boredom and exposure, where the lesson is that even the guardianship of future food is a present experience of deprivation. As the sun climbs, its light becomes a tangible pressure on the back of the neck for those in the open. The blacksmith, now at his roaring forge, feels this heat multiplied. The front of his body is baked, sweat etching clean tracks through the soot on his skin. The back of his tunic remains damp and cold from evaporating sweat caught in drafts. His eyes sting from smoke and sweat. His world is a binary hell of searing heat and glancing chill. His body the contested border. The pain of his labor is a thermodynamic punishment, a constant flux between extremes that leaves the senses raw and the mind narrowed to the color of the metal before him. A successful strike is not a victory, but a temporary alignment of will, muscle, and glowing iron in the face of this personal, elemental storm. In the solar of a modest house, a woman engages in the close work of embroidery. The pain here is one of exquisite constraint. The chair is hard. The back is held in a tense, upright posture for hours. The eyes, focused on minute, colorful stitches, strain until they burn. The fingers, guiding the fine needle, grow cramped and stiff. A headache often gathers at the base of the skull, a tight knot from sustained concentration. This is not survival labor, but it is labor nonetheless, a production of beauty or status that extracts a physical cost measured in migraines and spinal complaints. Her suffering is quiet, privileged, and entirely invisible in the finished piece, which shows only flowers and birds, not the ache in the bones that birthed them. The day's midpoint offers no respite, only a change of fuel. The bread eaten is coarse, demanding work from the jaws. The cheese is hard, the ale thin. The meal sits in the stomach like a ball of damp wool, providing mass but little vitality. The body, in this pause, does not refresh. It seizes. Muscles stiffen in the new position. Getting up from the ground or the bench is a fresh ordeal, often more difficult than the initial morning rise. The remainder of the day stretches out, a desert to be crossed with a dwindling store of water. The afternoon is thus a testament to endurance over ability. Work continues, but it is slower, more deliberate, as if moving through a thickening medium. Mistakes are more frequent, each a small spike of frustration that feeds the general fatigue. The mind's focus, which had been a sharp blade, is now a dull wedge. It requires effort to simply maintain a train of thought related to the task. The world beyond the immediate recedes further. The sky, the trees, the passing of clouds become a blurred backdrop to the intense, weary drama of the hands. And as the light once again begins to fail, leaching the color from the world, the rhythm of the day shifts toward closure. It is not a race to finish, but a careful, economical tying off of loose ends. Tasks are not completed so much as they are abandoned at a sustainable stopping point. The sense is not of accomplishment, but of depletion having reached its logical limit. Tools are shouldered, paths are retraced. The fire is met not as a welcome comfort, but as the only possible destination in a world growing cold and dark. The night that follows is not a negation of the day, but its echo chamber. In the darkness, the body replays the strains it endured, the pains singing more clearly in the absence of distraction. The mind, too tired to dream, simply hums with the residual vibration of effort. And underneath it all, in the stones of the hearth and the soil of the fields, in the wood of the loom and the iron of the plow, the memory of the day's pressure is absorbed, a faint, permanent impression left upon the world by the sheer, repeated force of aching existence. The stars emerge in different points of ancient fire, and the earth turns its face away from the sun, offering the cooling landscape to the silence, where the only truth is the slow, ceaseless wearing down of all things, both land and flesh, by the humble, brutal, and unending fact of use. The cooling is a process of profound settling. Heat, that fleeting, borrowed energy, radiates outward from stones, from packed earth floors, from the bodies of animals and people, fleeing into the star-hung void. What remains is not mere absence, but a positive, aggressive cold that actively seeks equilibrium, drawing warmth from any source with a patient, relentless suction. In the deep night, the world becomes a unified field of this cold, a continuum where the temperature of the air differs only slightly from the temperature of the wood beam, the clay cup, the wool blanket. The body, that last pocket of stubborn warmth, is under siege from all directions. Within the besieged citadel of the self, the sentinels are weary. The mind's watchtower is unmanned, its consciousness withdrawn to some deeper, unlit keep. The body's defensive systems operate on automatic with a grim, mechanical efficiency. Shivering is not a reaction. It is a strategy. It is the rapid, futile contraction of muscles in a desperate attempt to generate heat through friction, a tiny, internal fire lit by burning the body's own reserves. It is a costly, losing battle, and with each tremor, a little more energy is spent, a little more fatigue is embedded in the fibers. The body makes its choices. It sacrifices the extremities first. Fingers and toes grow numb, the blood retreating to guard the vital core, the heart, the lungs, the slumbering brain. This is not a failure, but a triage. The pain of the cold in the fingers is traded for the deeper, more dangerous chill that would come if the core were allowed to cool. It is a silent, physiological bargain struck in the dark. In the forest, this cold performs a different alchemy. It stills the sap in the trees, making the wood contract and occasionally crack with a sound like a muted gunshot. It forms hoarfrost on every surface, a lace of frozen breath upon spiderwebs, a fur of glittering needles on fallen logs. It preserves the scent of pine and damp earth, locking it in place, making the air crisp and fragrant in a way it never is by day. The creatures here are adapted to this economy. The badger in its set, the fox in its earth, are balls of fur-lined warmth, their metabolism slowed, their dreams, if they have them, untroubled by thoughts of tomorrow's hunger. Their pain is immediate and terminal. Their comfort is a matter of adequate insulation and a full belly. They do not dread the cold. They are its practitioners. Near the silent mill pond, the cold works its most obvious magic. It stills the water's surface, then begins to build a skin of ice from the edges inward. The process is silent, a gradual claiming. Beneath the nascent ice, the water is darker, holding the last of the day's warmth in a liquid prison. For a creature falling through, the cold is not a slow ache but an instant, shocking theft of breath and function, a brutal shortcut to the end of sensation. The mill itself, its great wheel frozen in mid-turn, stands as a monument to arrested purpose. The cold has not broken it. It has simply pressed pause on its reason for being, rendering its massive timbers and clever gears as meaningful as the stones in the field. The silence is the silence of an interrupted idea. In the narrow bed of a scholar, pain takes a metaphysical turn. His is the ache of stillness, of a body forced into long periods of immobility while the mind travels ancient texts and conceptual landscapes. The candlelight strains his eyes, painting floating after images on the darkness when he finally closes them. His back protests the hunched posture. His stomach grumbles, unsettled by poor food and intellectual anxiety. His suffering is compounded by awareness. He knows his body is failing in its duties, that it is a frail vessel for his thoughts. His chill is not just of the air, but of the spirit. The cold fear that his work is futile, that his pain will leave no mark on the world, that he too will be swallowed by the same oblivion that claims the illiterate laborer. His fire is mental, and it burns his fuel as surely as the blacksmith's forge. For the sentry, the cold is his co-worker and his enemy. It sharpens his senses even as it dulls his fingers. It makes the leather of his boots stiff, the metal of his helmet a band of ice against his brow. His vigilance is a duel with numbness. He must stamp his feet, clap his hands, swing his arms in wide arcs. Not exercises, but desperate defenses against the creeping frost that seeks to still him permanently. His world is the tiny island of his perception, surrounded by an ocean of black, frozen silence. Every sound is amplified, every shadow a potential threat. His pain is one of acute, sustained tension, a wire pulled taut across the long hours, vibrating with the strain of anticipation. The dawn will bring relief from the dark, but not from the cold, only a change in the quality of his isolation. Then the first flaw in the night's fabric. Not a sound, but a subtle, almost imperceptible lightening in the texture of the darkness to the east. It is less a color than a thinning, as if the black is being worn away by a gentle cosmic abrasion. This change is felt in the blood before it is seen by the eyes. The body's internal clock, an ancient mechanism wound by millennia of sunrise, releases a chemical sigh. The pulse adjusts. The shivering may intensify for a moment, a final, violent protest before the system prepares for engagement. The mind, drifting in its formless sea, senses the shift in current and begins its slow ascent toward the rocky shore of awareness. The return is not gentle. It is an invasion of sensations, each one a demand. The cold on the cheek pressed against the straw, the hard ridge of the bed frame against the hip, the sour taste of sleep in the mouth, the full, urgent pressure of the bladder. These are the world's first questions of the new cycle, and they must be answered immediately. There is no luxury of lingering, of contemplating the dawn. There is only the pressing, physical reality of a body that requires management. The act of rising is a revolt. Every joint is a rusted hinge. Muscles are shortened ropes, unwilling to extend. The breath hitches with the effort. The first upright posture is a victory over gravity and inertia, but it feels like a defeat of comfort. The room in this pre-dawn gray is a catalog of lacks. The empty hearth, the near-empty water bucket, the dwindling pile of fuel. The fire-making is not a nurturing of comfort, but the ignition of a tool. The spark is a commodity, cherished not for its light but for its utility. The flame that follows is an employee, hired to perform the tasks of heating and illumination, its beauty and irrelevance. Stepping over the threshold is to cross into the day's jurisdiction. The air is a shock, a slap of pure condition. It carries the news of the world, frost or damp, or a certain sharpness that promises clearer cold. The sky is a vast, open expanse of fading gray, an arena waiting to be filled with labor. The path, the well, the field, they are not locations but obligations in topographic form. And so, the machine of the day is wound once more. The first sounds are not voices, but impacts. The thud of an axe into a block, the scrape of a shovel on stone, the creak of a bucket on its rope. These are the priming strokes. Human speech, when it comes, is functional, stripped of ornament. A grunt of direction, a muttered observation about the ice on the water trough. Language is a tool for coordinating effort, not for expressing feeling. The work that follows is a kind of osmosis. The will of the person seeps into the material world. The soil is turned, the wood is split, the cloth is woven, but the resistance of that world seeps back into the person. The hardness of the ground enters through the feet and knees. The weight of the water enters through the shoulders and spine. The repetition of the task enters through the joints and the mind, wearing grooves of habit and ache. There is no separation between the worker and the work. They become a single straining system, a circuit through which fatigue flows continuously. The sun, when it finally shows itself, is a mere fact. It provides light by which to see the work, and a slight mitigation of the cold's bitter edge. It does not inspire. It merely enables. Its passage across the sky is the only reliable measure of progress. A slow sweep of a shadow that tells you how much of the daily quota of endurance has been spent, and how much remains. And as that shadow lengthens once again, the process reverses. The energy flows back out of the world. Tools are set down. Steps turn homeward. The system winds down. The fire is fed not for cheer, but as a final, defensive measure against the night's return. The body settles into its evening inventory of pains, a list that is longer and more detailed than the morning's. Each item a receipt for a specific expenditure of the day. Then, the dark. It does not fall. It rises. It wells up from the ground, pours out from under the trees, floods in from the edges of the sky until it swallows the last gleam of light on the horizon. The world is simplified once more to the elements of cold, stillness, and the slow, internal processes of worn-out bodies. The great wheel has turned another notch. The groove is deeper. The silence is complete, save for the wind, which now carries no scent but its own, moving from nowhere to nowhere, an eternal breath over a landscape of quiet, uncomplaining use. The wind's breath is not empty passage. It is a carrier of finality, smoothing the sharp edges of sound into a soft, pervasive hiss against thatch and stone. In its wake, the world achieves a state not of peace, but of spent potential. The last residual heat from the day's labor has been coaxed from the stones of the hearth, from the packed earth of the floor, and surrendered to the void. What remains is a profound equilibrium of cold, a perfect balance where nothing gives and nothing receives. The body in this state is no longer a fortress under siege, but a territory fully occupied. The cold has won. It resides in the marrow, in the joints, in the deep tissues of the thighs and back. It is no longer an invader. It is a tenant. To shiver now would be a waste of precious energy. So the body stills, conserving its last embers of warmth for the essential, automatic processes, the heartbeat, the shallow breath, ceding the rest to the occupying chill. In this absolute stillness, time distorts. It ceases to be a sequence of events and becomes a condition, like the cold itself. An hour is indistinguishable from a minute. The mind, untethered from the sun's rhythm, floats in a dimensionless sea. Dreams, if they come, are not narratives but sensory ghosts. The phantom weight of a yoke on the shoulders, the taste of stale bread, the sound of a cough that is both memory and reality. The sleeper does not travel to other worlds. They sink deeper into the layers of this one, into the substrata of accumulated fatigue, where the distinction between past pain and present ache dissolves. The body on its pallet is not a person, but a landscape, a range of sore muscles, valleys of stiff joints, the slow, underground rivers of circulation pushing weakly against the cold. Beyond the walls, the cold performs its meticulous artistry. It draws moisture from the air and paints it onto every surface as a crystalline fur. It tightens the skin on puddles until it is a taut, black glass. It stills the leaves in the hedgerows, holding them in frozen arrest. Life here is reduced to its most essential form, persistence. The vole in its run deep under the frost line continues its blind, chewing existence. The owl on its branch is a feathered knot of patience and hunger, its internal fire banked. It senses a wide, silent net cast over the white field. Pain in this realm is not chronic. It is consummation. The rabbit's final moment in the talons is a brilliant, total flash, a conclusion to the long, cold fear. For the landscape itself, there is no pain, only change, the slow, geologic creep of ice, the granular breakdown of stone by frost. Its timescale renders human suffering ephemeral, a brief, feverish flicker against an indifferent, frozen backdrop. For the ill individual lying separate on a pallet near the fire, the night is a landscape of its own, interior and fevered. Their pain is not the general ache of use, but a specific tyrannical presence. A throbbing abscess becomes the center of the universe. A burning lung dictates the rhythm of every ragged breath. The chill of the room battles the furnace of their skin. Their consciousness is a tiny, bright pinprick focused entirely on the map of their own distress, each throb a landmark, each spike a territory of terror. The night for them is not a passage of time, but an expanse of sensation to be crossed, and the dawn offers no promise of respite, only the possibility of a different quality of suffering. The muffled sounds of others sleeping are not comfort, but evidence of a world from which they are isolated by the sheer, monopolizing intensity of their own flesh's rebellion. In the chapel, where a single candle might gutter before a crude icon, the cold is sanctified. The kneeling figure, if one kneels, feels the stone bite through thin wool, a deliberate mortification. The breath forms prayers that hang visible in the air before dissipating. Here, physical discomfort is not an obstacle to thought, but its medium. The ache in the knees, the numbness in the fingers folded in prayer. These are offerings, a literal feeling of one's own limits offered up to the limitless. The silence is not empty, but charged with an expectancy that turns pain into dialogue. The cold is not an enemy, but a purifying agent, stripping away the illusions of bodily comfort to reveal the stark framework of faith or desperation beneath. For the devout, it is a communion with sacrifice. For the desperate, it is simply another form of begging, the body's misery added to the voice's plea. As the deepest part of the night pivots toward morning, the change is first felt as a pressure, not a light. It is a subtle shift in the quality of the darkness, a slight lessening of its depth, as if a great, soft weight is being incrementally lifted from the world. This is sensed in the blood, in the animal core of the brain. The body, a creature of rhythms older than walls or fire, responds before the mind can form a thought. Metabolism ticks upward a fraction. The heart prepares its pace, the lungs ready for a deeper draft. It is an ancient, cellular recognition of the celestial turn, a preparation for the trial of consciousness. Waking, when it arrives, is not an emergence but an imposition. The self is poured, cold and stiff, back into its familiar container of aches and needs. The eyes open not to welcome the day, but to acknowledge its inevitability. The first sensations are an assault. The grit in the corners of the eyes, the dry paste of the tongue, the specific, vivid protest of the spine as it remembers it must now form a column again. The will to move is a cold, hard pebble in the chest, a small, heavy thing that must be swallowed before any action can begin. The ritual of fire-making is repeated with the solemnity of a duty to a capricious god. The success of the spark is not guaranteed. The hands, wooden with cold, fumble. The tinder may be damp. This minute struggle is a microcosm of the day to come, a difficult, necessary persuasion of the world to yield a fragment of its energy for human use. When the flame finally catches, its light is forensic. It shows the night's leavings, the ashes, the empty vessels, the sleeping forms still wrapped in their private battles. It provides no warmth yet, only a visual confirmation of the world one must now re-enter. Crossing the threshold is to submit to the day's terms. The air outside is a definitive statement. It speaks of the weather to be endured, a biting, clear cold, or a damp, penetrating chill that will later become rain. The sky is a vast, open plain, its pale color offering no solace, only scope. The path to the well, the barn, the woodpile, is not a choice but a track worn by necessity. Each step on it is a reaffirmation of a contract signed at birth, effort in exchange for continued existence. The work that begins is not chosen. It is assumed, like a yoke settled onto familiar grooves in the shoulders. The body falls into its patterns, the bend, the lift, the pull, with the grim efficiency of a machine that knows no other function. The mind, to conserve energy, narrows its aperture to the immediate task. The alignment of the seed in the furrow, the tension of the thread on the loom, the angle of the adze on the beam. Thought becomes a function of the hands. Philosophy is the correct grip on a tool. Morality is the completion of the row. The sun's climb is a slow, silent meter. It does not warm. It merely indicates the passage of the portion of life allotted to labor. Its light is a tool revealing flaws in the work, highlighting the dust raised by effort, casting the long shadow of the self upon the ground. A shadow that is itself a mere absence of light, a fitting silhouette for a life defined by the presence of toil and the absence of ease. As this silent meter reaches its apex and begins its decline, the quality of the effort changes. It is not that the work is finished, but that the fuel for it is nearly spent. Movements become more economical, each one evaluated for its cost in dwindling reserves. Communication dwindles to gestures, to nods. The world beyond the immediate task, the color of the sky, the flight of a bird, fades into a blur. The entire being becomes a single, focused intent to reach the stopping point. And when that point is reached, it is not a border crossed, but a wall leaned upon. The return to the hearth is a retreat. The fire, now fed, is a barrier against the creeping night. The evening's consumption of food is a refueling, not a celebration. The body, in the firelight, conducts its final, honest audit of the day's damages, a list longer and more intricate than the morning's anticipations. Then the inevitable surrender. The body, its accounts tallied, seeks the blankness that is its only true reprieve. The dark gathers not as an enemy, but as a natural conclusion, the ink that blots out the weary script of the day. The cold, patient, and eternal resumes its quiet reclamation of all that the day's fragile fires had briefly pushed back. The world turns, and in the vast, silent spaces between the stars, the small, persistent rhythm of heartbeats and breath continues, a faint, biological counterpoint to the immense, slow turning of the stone and the ice, a testimony not to joy or meaning, but to the sheer, stubborn fact of continuation against the grain of an uncaring universe. The uncaring universe turns with a silence so complete it becomes a sound of its own, a high, thin ringing in the deepest chambers of the ear, perceived only when all other noise has been stripped away. This is the baseline. Upon it, the small, desperate sounds of life are etched like faint scratches on glass. The rasp of a sleeper's breath catching on a dry throat. The minute crackle of frost expanding a timber in the wall. The infinitesimal shift of straw beneath a seeking hip bone. In this hyperclarity of the deep night, the body is not a unity, but a confederation of complaints, each speaking in its own dialect of ache. The throb of a bruised shin is a slow, deep drum. The sting of a rope burn on the palm is a sharp, insistent wire. The cold in the joints is a dull, pervasive hum, the foundational note upon which all other pains compose their discordant symphony. Metabolism in these hours is not a fire, but a banked peat glow, a slow, smoldering oxidation barely sufficient to maintain the integrity of the system. Energy is not spent. It is hoarded with a miser's desperation. The body performs its essential maintenance in the dark, a crew of enzymes and cells working by feel, patching torn membranes with clumsy, fibrous scar tissue, scavenging minerals from one site to shore up another. Healing is not a return to wholeness, but a series of stopgap measures, compromises made under duress, ensuring the machine will function, not that it will function well. The sleep that houses this work is not restful. It is a state of anxious biochemical triage. Outside, the cold has achieved a kind of perfection. It has leached all movement from the air. Smoke from the last chimney rises in a perfectly vertical, gray thread until it dissipates into nothingness. The stars are not twinkling points but hard, frozen diamonds drilled into the black velvet of the sky, their light offering no illumination, only a cruel, geometric reminder of distance and isolation. The landscape is a study in arrested motion. The frozen stream is a twisted ribbon of captured flow. The ice-laden branch is a sculpture of interrupted growth. Life here exists in the subtext. Under the snow, a million seeds hold their breath. In the mud of the pond bottom, a frog is suspended in a state of chemical grace. Its heart stopped, its blood laced with natural antifreeze, waiting for a thaw that is not guaranteed. Its survival is a form of forgetting, a temporary resignation from the business of pain altogether. For the miller, asleep in his house attached to the silent mill, the night's quiet is an accusation. The absence of the wheel's groan and the grind of the stones is a void where his purpose should be. His dreams are not of rest, but of blockages, of choked mill races, of spoiled grain, of gears seizing. His body's aches from lifting sacks and shoveling flour are companions to this professional anxiety. His pain is twofold: the physical residue of labor and the mental strain of a livelihood dependent on the cooperation of water, stone, and the needs of others, all of which lie dormant, and therefore uncertain, in the frozen dark. In the kennel, the hunting hounds sleep piled together for warmth, a single, twitching mound of muscle and coarse fur. Their dreams are of scent and pursuit, legs paddling silently in sleep. Their pains are simple: the thorn extracted, the pad worn raw, the hunger before feeding. They do not dread the dawn's hunt. They anticipate it with a pure, bodily yearning. Their existence is a cycle of satiation and depletion, of action and collapse, untroubled by memory or ambition. Their cold is answered by the warmth of the pack. Their fatigue is absolute and uncomplicated. In their simple, collective being, they achieve a kind of peace that eludes the creature who tends them, who lies alone with thoughts of rent and tithe and the Lord's favor. As the planet's turn brings the hidden edge of the sun closer to the horizon, the first change is not visual, but tonal. The absolute silence softens, acquiring a faint, textured quality, as if the darkness itself is becoming less dense. This is the world preparing its instruments. Somewhere, a lone bird, a robin or a blackbird, emits a single liquid note, a probe sent into the void. It is not a song, but a question. It is often unanswered, but it breaks the spell of pure night. In the byre, a cow's stomach gurgles, a deep, liquid sound of ongoing internal process. The ice on the water bucket emits a faint ping as a new crystal forms. These sounds are the first, tentative ticks of a clock restarting. Within the body, the shift is hormonal and profound. A silent signal is given. The adrenal whisper begins, a subtle drip of chemicals into the bloodstream that prepares the organism for stress. The heart, that dutiful pump, receives its orders and imperceptibly increases its tempo. Muscles, locked in their cold clench, receive a preliminary alert to prepare for extension. The mind, buried in its peat bog sleep, begins to ferment toward the surface. Dreams, if any remain, take on a frantic logistical quality. Dreams of searching for a lost tool, of a path that doubles back on itself, of trying to lift a weight that refuses to budge. These are the anxieties of the body, translated into symbols. Waking, then, is not a gentle surfacing, but a chemical catapult back into sentience. The eyes open onto the same patch of gray-dark ceiling. The first cognition is a sensory avalanche. Cold, hard, aching, full. The body is a litany of specific grievances. The mind's first task is not to think, but to register this inventory and, with a sigh that is more a collapse of the lungs than an expression, to accept it. The will to move is the heaviest object in the universe. Moving it requires leverage found only in desperation, the desperation of a full bladder, the desperation of a crying child, the desperation of knowing that to delay is only to increase the pain of the inevitable. The fire again. The struggle with flint and steel in the clawing cold is a primal contest. It is humanity's oldest magic, and its most unreliable. The hands are stupid with cold. The spark is a fleeting, rebellious spirit. The moment when the tinder catches and a true flame licks upward is a small, savage victory. It is the creation of order from chaos, of warmth from cold, of a focal point in the formless dark. But the victory is fleeting. The flame's light immediately reveals the paucity it must fight against. The dwindling log pile, the shallow water in the bucket, the drawn faces of others now stirring in its glow. This light does not comfort. It commissions. It shows the work that must now begin. Crossing the threshold is to be baptized into the day's true condition. The outside air is a definitive truth, an absolute that admits no argument. It tells you everything you need to know about the next 12 hours of your life. It bites, or it soaks, or it slices. The sky, now a vast, pale dome of undifferentiated gray, offers no promise, only volume. It is the arena. The path to the well is the first lap. The body, still protesting, is forced into its working gait. A stiff, efficient shamble that minimizes shock to the complaining knees and spine. The work assumes its mantle. It is not undertaken. It is resumed. The body knows the motions better than the mind. The hands find their grips. The back finds its angle of compromise. The feet plant themselves in the familiar stances. The mind, to survive the tedium and the pain, empties itself. It becomes a clear pool reflecting only the immediate task. The soil before the plowshare, the thread through the heddle, the seam of hot metal on the anvil. Higher thought, wonder, regret, hope, is a luxury the system cannot afford. Consciousness narrows to a brilliant, painful point of focus, a laser of attention burning away everything but the next necessary action. The sun, when it finally drags itself above the horizon, is a pale, washed-out coin, provides light but no vitality. Its journey across the sky is a slow, celestial sigh. Its light is utilitarian, revealing the texture of the task, the quality of the work, the dust of effort hanging in the air. It casts long, stark shadows that are themselves mere absences, voids shaped like men and tools, appropriate for a world where presence is defined by labor and what is left behind is just an empty outline. As this sighing arc descends, the energy of the world, what little was borrowed from the sun, is recalled. Work becomes a careful drawing down of reserves. Movements are paired to the essential. Communication ceases. The entire being becomes a single, focused imperative, to reach the point where stopping is permissible. This point is not defined by completion, but by exhaustion. It is the moment when the body's signals of distress become so loud they drown out the voice of duty. The return is a retreat in good order. The fire is built up as a final bastion. The evening meal is consumed with the solemnity of a refueling stop. The body, in the fire's dancing light, conducts its grim reconciliation. It compares the morning's anticipatory aches with the evening's earned agonies, and finds the account deeply in the red. There is no satisfaction, only the cessation of expenditure. Then the surrender. The body is laid down like a tool returned to its chest. The dark flows in, a silent tide that erases the sharp edges of the world, blending stool, hearth, and sleeping form into a single mass of shadow. The cold, patient and eternal, advances once more, reclaiming the territory ceded to the day's frail fires. And in the immense quiet, under the frozen stars, the slow, stubborn rhythm of heart and lung continues. A tiny, biological drumbeat against the vast, silent drone of cosmic indifference. A testament not to triumph, but to the sheer, unyielding persistence of a mechanism that has not yet, despite everything, been switched off. The universe may be indifferent, but the pulse, for now, still answers its own dark, insistent question.